Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, A Holistic Approach to Quality, Hypertesting, and Lean Automation. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see the GoToWebinar control panel in the upper right corner of your computer screen. You have joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. If you have selected mic and speakers and having any difficulty hearing me, please toggle the telephone option in your control panel and dial in. If you're experiencing any issues, please type in the details in the question sections of your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. In today's webinar, you'll hear how Sauce Labs and Aspire Systems have partnered to provide a complete continuous testing solution for teams that want to deliver quality applications faster using modern methodologies and platforms. Aspire Systems is a global technology services firm with a focus on hyper-testing quality engineering. They leverage best-in-class automation tools such as Sauce Labs' award-winning continuous testing cloud to help teams move away from manual processes to full automation and continuous testing throughout the software delivery cycle. Through the partnership with Sauce Labs, they provide a full stack testing solution that can be integrated into a modern software delivery pipeline. Today, you'll get insights on how Sauce Labs and Aspire Systems can be partners in your initiative to modernize your software delivery lifecycle and hear how a leading retailer is leveraging their offering to transform their testing organization. And now I'd like to pass the mic over to Naveen Srinivasan, the Senior Consultant at Aspire Systems. Naveen?
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone. I'm Naveen Srinivasan. I've been associated with Aspire System as a Senior Consultant for Retail Testing Practice. I've been helping customers with testing solution across their omni-channel, supply chain, and digital transformation. My functions of expertise include e-commerce, enterprise order management, warehouse operations, and digital solutions through app and web. I've had an opportunity to work with several Fortune 500 companies at Aspire, providing them test consulting and help them provide roadmap for their quality journey. I'm also an avid reader and a tech enthusiast with strong interest in innovation across retail tech space. Aspire System is a global technology service firm with expertise in software engineering, digital service, testing and infrastructure and application support. Aspire works with independent software vendors and some of the world's most innovative enterprise in retail, BFSI, and education verticals. The company currently has over 3,000 employees, 150 customers, and is a CMMI Level 3 certified. Aspire has extended its global presence across US, UK, Singapore, Middle East, and India. Aspire has been recognized among India's best companies to work for in 2019 by Great Places to Work Institute for the 10th time consecutively. So the agenda for this webinar is we'll start with a case study about a retail fashion giant, their challenges that they faced and how we came up with a test automation approach to overcome the late challenges. I will also talk about hyper-testing approach that was followed during the exercise and how it helped customer turn around things quicker with a better quality. Since the customer had an omni-channel presence, we had to validate different checkpoints across their retail landscape. So we had to have an integrated approach towards testing. We will see how we did that in our upcoming slides. Finally, a better understanding of how we have helped the retailer achieve quality across their application, making them more agile, getting them faster to market by doing it in a very cost-efficient way. So this problem statement, do anyone see anything wrong in it? It looks like a good defect description, nothing wrong in it, right? It's an incomplete defect. If something like this comes up, the development team has to do a proper research over the problem and understand the root cause of it. All this because it hasn't been structured well and a deep analysis isn't being made to the problem statement. So how can we define this problem in a better and a detailed way so that it takes lesser time for the team to provide a better workaround? Hypertesting would be the answer. Hypertesting is an agile and unified test approach towards designing end-to-end testing solution covering all application layer with the best test automation tool across market, giving a better ROI at a lower cost. Let me explain the implementation of hypertesting with a case study. As mentioned earlier, let's talk about a case study and what kind of testing approach was practiced for the particular customer and how what kind of a quality standard was achieved for them. Our customer is a retail giant and has a leading brand presence across United States. They are into assortment of businesses like apparels, cosmetics, shoes, accessories with large selection of merchandise. Since it's a large business, we had more products with multi-layer of applications involved in their entire retail landscape. We at Aspire have a consultative approach followed for every client of ours to understand the business objective right and then move towards charting a better technology tool stack suited for that business. While listing out the business objectives, we understood that they were more into innovation, which cater to the millennials' buying behavior, that made them move to the digital transformation bandwagon with customer engagement being the crux of their business. There were several applications and layers for a single order to be processed, be it e-commerce followed by EOM, WMS, and then the POS system. So making sure that all systems talk to each other with the same data and information that is being passed through was the key to success here. They also wanted a faster release cycle due to continual change that they implemented in their products. They were also wanting us to cater for different OS, browser, and devices, and also make sure that the product, just to make sure that the product behaves the same way across all platforms. Finally, a performance management tool to make sure that they aren't losing any customer due to application performance that was going to be implemented. So once we knew what the ask is for, we had to get into the existing ecosystem and look out for the changes that need to be brought to make it better. So they had a large data set with more than around 3,000 test cases that would comprise of both functional and non-functional test cases. They did not have any automation implemented, increasing their time to validate the test scenarios, which eventually led to more defect leakage. Their tool stack involved a lot of different technologies like .NET, React.js, Java, their mobile apps, and they also had multiple integrations with third-party application, which involved a lot of API calls that had to be made. With everything in place, they were working on a waterfall method, increasing the cost and time of the entire process, making it very difficult for them to move towards agile. They also lacked in innovation and technical ability to have a sound, robust, scalable automation framework that would fit their retail landscape perfectly. So with a set of qualified retail consultants, we were able to jot down what had to be done better to achieve enhanced results. The need of the hour was to minimize the production defect leakage and have the estimated test run to be brought down drastically from around 60 days to 10 days time. This also meant a faster feedback cycle had to be implemented to identify any showstoppers and report them in 30 minutes time. That said, testing their application in more browsers and device combination with different versions also needed to be done. Test automation had to reduce the time and effort spent by the manual test teams, focusing more on functional and core area, focusing more on the functional and core areas of release, and leave the rest of the test, including the performance and security, to be run by the automation tool. Apparently, the entire exercise was to bring down the testing cost and with a very low maintenance effort. How did we achieve this? Uh, we achieved this using hypertesting. We were able to define the core business areas and having a holistic test approach to elevate the entire process from quality assurance to quality excellence. We had an integrated strategy where the test would communicate with different applications and cover the entire test from non-functional, functional, security, performance, regression. Everything would be done using just one framework. The Sprint Plus One approach had us made a really good utilization of manual resources, making their core objective to focus on functional cases and making the overall process faster and a better one. The unified test approach has one framework that would cater to the requirement of different technologies used in the application and help us in faster test automation with all these reusable components. The framework was also integrated with continuous integration and deployment, which will bring in faster build and cut down the entire process of testing the applications to at least 30% faster. All this was achieved using cloud services that enable servers run multiple parallel tests across different systems and applications. So all this could be achieved only with uh, people who are techno domain enabled, which makes them understand the business and the cost behind it with the required test automation knowledge. So what is shift left approach? How can we move from quality assurance lifecycle to quality excellence lifecycle? Shift left approach is shifting the entire process of testing a step earlier to make sure that we have better consistency and a faster time to market. It is a unified strategy that would take into account all application and layers of it and create a complete test automation package. Identifying high occurrence of defects at earlier stage of the SDLC lifecycle has not only reduced the entire cost, but has also significantly improved the software lifecycle to be more consistent. With this approach, we would be able to bring in all different sets of tests, including performance, security, API, everything just under one roof. With continuous monitoring of the application, it would be able to provide actionable feedback that could be worked around faster, and the business objectives and the KPI would be listed and making it the top priority is always customer centric rather than uh, process centric. So let me also give you a quick snapshot of Sprint Plus One process. The Sprint Plus One is an approach that makes the maximum utilization of manual as well as the automation testers. It is a method that provides high test coverage with greater return on investment. As illustrated below, usually the code will be verified at n plus one build, but due to shift left approach, testing starts at build n. This has been done by manual testers, enabling them to focus more on the functional cases, where the functional cases which is being verified is being passed to the test development team, where scripting takes place, and the execution of those scripts will be available at n plus one. So what does this particular assignment, particular process bring to the table? It brings more steadiness to the builds that are available. High coverage with different functional checklists helps testers and developers confirm that the release build does not have any lot of deviation. It has also been used as a kind of an acceptance test from the development team, where they can confirm various checkpoints and take necessary action in case of any discrepancy. Um, so the overall method has proved to be very cost efficient with faster build release and high test coverage with very low maintenance cost. So how do you enable hyper testing? Using AFTA, Aspire's framework for test automation. AFTA 3.0 is an advanced test automation framework that supports functional, non-functional API, mobile, and POS automation testing. It's like a one-stop solution for all your test automation needs. This is a robust and a scalable framework that enables customer to achieve faster time to market with top quality. The framework is a free plug-and-play framework which can build according to the user's business that enables them to choose between either behavioral-driven or test-driven method of execution. It can also integrate with test management tools like Jira, TestLink, providing a test repository of all the documents, requirements, and results to be available at one place, which will enable the testers to be more agile towards the entire process. It can also integrate with JMeter and OWASP to make sure that there aren't any performance slowdown or any security vulnerability. The reusable components available in the framework has the ability to speed up the scripting process to almost 35% faster, and the work literally begins at day one. The biggest addition to this framework is that it can integrate with the Source Lab for seamless testing of various versions of mobile web, be it iPhone 5 or be it iPhone 11 or latest or oldest version of Chrome and Safari. It acts as an enabler to fasten the entire testing process with parallel execution. This helps the tester and the business on how the product behaves across various versions of the browsers and real-time devices, ensuring the business a very little room of error. It has also been enabled with CI/CD pipeline for seamless integration. For example, a user needs to run a set of functional cases. He or she doesn't need to wait for the developer's affirmation. The build gets pulled directly from the repository and starts execution of the mentioned functional test cases. Any error in the build will be informed to the respective stakeholders through an email that will be automatically sent to their inbox with the necessary and sufficient information. This reduces manual intervention at several touch points and makes sure that the testing process is more faster and more agile. Since it's also been integrated with Source Lab, the tester can decide which device and browser they want to enable the framework to, and the framework automatically initiates the parallel execution run according to the requirement. This brings in a faster and varied errors at just a single push, and that helps the business learn that the application is working the same way across all channels. A better illustration of how CI/CD works across applications is demonstrated here. Normally, when a build comes in for a test, it isn't being looked at until the next possible availability of the tester. In this case, if the build has been pushed at around 9 p.m., it's not been looked at least until 9 a.m. This eats a lot of time of the entire software development lifecycle, slowing down the process of finding, fixing, and reinitiating a newer build. Using CI/CD with hypertesting, it enables the test to be picked up, run overnight, and give away test results at stakeholders' inbox during the next available work hour. This enables them to understand the kind of test that has been run and what different results mean for the business to act upon. This also helps them to be more agile, and he or she can act upon the results at a faster rate, which in turn increases the speed of the entire SDLC process. Business are also pre-informed, and the process being very transparent makes them take a better decision and help a quality product reach their audience at a faster time. This is how a real-time dashboard, which has been integrated with our automation framework, looks like. The tests have been integrated using CI/CD, which enables them to be picked up and run against the required test set. If you see here, there are around seven different scenarios that has been tested with around 1,349 steps that is involved. This would typically take around 2 hours time to test, but using test automation, and we are also integrating with Source Lab, it has helped us to achieve that in around 11 minutes time by running it in different combination of browsers and devices. As you can also see, the time of execution, it's around 12:05 a.m., which is around midnight, where a build has been pushed and validated using continuous integration. This is how typically an interactive dashboard would look like, and which can also be customized according to a customer need. So now we are back to the first question. How do you see the difference now? Previously, There were results, but they were a little blunt. With developers had to take a deeper look at it and recreate the entire issue to make sure that what went wrong. So now the developer has a well-informed defect with the root cause screenshots, allowing them to take informed decision. This is a result of integrating the tests across all layers of application that is available in the landscape and pointing out the exact error due to varied system changes that has been made. This gives a developer a better deep dive of the issue and making it easier for them to fix the problem in a faster and a better way. So, so the overall tangible value add to the customer would be that the test automation framework was implemented more as a quality framework instead of a quantity one. This made us achieve zero production defect due to vast coverage of tests that was run. There were several checkpoints increased. There were several checkpoints with increased coverage that has enabled the entire silos of the SDLC to act as a single unit and work on faster fixing of defects. This has also helped us to reduce the entire testing timeline, as we mentioned earlier, from 60% days to 10% days. With the integration of Sauce Lab, we were able to run around 15 different browsers and real-time mobile device combinations. With low maintenance and high quality, with the faster turnaround time, we were able to achieve a significant monetary saving to the customer as well. And of course, the intangible value is taking the customer to the podium every single year with high quality products out in the market. So right now we are exploring the integration of Sauce Labs screener towards our automation framework. So this enables development team to get faster turnaround time on code and increase build efficiency by running tests earlier in their delivery pipeline. By blending this against our framework, it will enable both testers and developers to quickly find defects and send a quick feedback with the cross browser testing. With this particular thing, the customer will benefit from a single unified testing experience that can scale instantly, while reducing the time and resource that needs to support and maintain their entire test infrastructure. Thank you for listening to me. I'm Naveen Srinivasan. Please feel free to ask any questions or write to me at naveen.srinivasan@aspiresys.com. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Amir.
Okay, thank you, Naveen. Um, Perfect, thank you, Bill. So thank you, Naveen. That was really interesting and informational, and a lot of good statistics in there. So thank you so much. So hi, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Amir Rozenberg. I'm Director of Product Management here at Sauce Labs. And what we wanted to talk today is basically a complementary topic to what Naveen spoke about. If you use the methodologies that Naveen spoke about in combination between Aspire and Sauce Labs, what we're seeing is customers' ability to define what we call continuous testing maturity, and then identify areas how to measure and how to grow that maturity to basically have a scalable, predictable, and successful continuous testing practice. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Great. Bill, would you mind, next slide, please? Perfect. So I got a couple of topics that I'd like to cover today. Just quickly, we're going to talk about what digital engagement means and why testing and ongoing quality is at the heart of being successful in digital engagement. We're going to talk about some practices in building a continuous testing practice. And then we're going to talk about scoring a continuous test maturity and how to build the next level of maturity, how to grow your maturity based on that score. And of course, like Naveen mentioned, at the end, we can have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. Perfect. So Everybody on this webinar have probably seen a lot of slides and a lot of talks about digital transformation and digital engagement. And this is a topic that, for me personally, I'm very enthused about this topic. I really believe in it. And what really caught my eye about this particular picture is how, through digital engagement and appropriate and targeted digital engagement, you can deliver the right set of services to the right user in the time of their convenience, right? And so, as opposed to a user going to the bank and then, extracting cash to deliver to the other person who bought lunch for her, this person at that point in time can go and say, okay, I can transfer some money to you using not even typing, using voice chat, using the application. And so, the ability through digital transformation to create many new and new touch points that are highly effective and are delightful to the end user are really meaningful in whatever vertical you're in. It could be in banking, healthcare, travel, hospitality, media, and so forth. We're creating really intimate touch points with the end user, and this way delivering services that are highly tailored to their context, whether it's time, location, interest, history, and so forth. Next slide, please. And one of the examples that really inspires me personally, and I can tell you that I am a user of this technology, is Erica from Bank of America. So Erica is a voice chatbot inside the Bank of America application. There are multiple and growing number of transactions that you can conduct with Erica hands-free as you're driving, or if you're busy doing something else. You can check your account balance, you can transfer money, and so forth. What's really interesting about this is that, of course, Erica remembers you personally, it remembers your voice, it remembers the session that you're conducting right now. So the next question is dependent on the previous question that you asked. You can continue a dialogue. And all of that together creates a highly effective and delightful experience. And so if you now step back from Erica as an example, what really, in my view, Bank of America is trying to do here, they're trying to digitize the business and create a new touch point using voice via the application with the end user at their convenience, on their conditions, on the device of their choice. But what does that really mean? If you want to really dominate your vertical in terms of digital dominance, what that means is that you really need to invest in software innovation and acceleration. So it's not only, you need to, whenever Face ID is available, Touch ID, when you have credit card scanning or any new technology that really streamlines and enriches the user experience, you need to be there first. And your innovation as well, such as Erica indeed, you need to decrease the time to market, and that drives a high velocity for your teams. But what that means, if you double click on what does software innovation and velocity mean, that means that you need to have somehow quality not delaying your process, really helping you focus on innovation and have the quality addressed in other means. Next slide, please. However, what we're seeing as reality from the marketplace is that testing is actually a bottleneck to accelerate velocity and innovation. This is a survey from GitLab from 2018, which shows that testing, in the eyes of the survey participants, is the actual largest bottleneck in terms of achieving velocity. And this is exactly what we're seeing in the marketplace. I think Naveen referred to this a little bit. Development tools in the SDLC have had significant investment in terms of shifting left and really accelerating velocity. But it's not been the same level of investment in terms of quality tools. And it's Sauce Lab's belief, it's my personal belief, that software testing, software quality needs to run at the same velocity as software innovation. In fact, one of the Forrester slides, interestingly enough, talks about the acceleration over time of release cycles. And what you see is that acceleration of release cycle has not only gone stagnant, Some organizations are actually putting more time between releases because they need to achieve the appropriate level of quality to not have defects in production. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to spend a little time talking a little bit about how to build the continuous quality or continuous testing practice. And in my view, the fundamental thing to understand is that continuous testing is very similar, or actually it is a software development process. It is an agile process in itself, and it needs to adopt the same methodology and same perspective as agile software creation. So if you look at the top chart, for example, I'm showing here a chart that basically the y-axis is the coverage that you can achieve all the way from 20% to 85%, assuming that there is a percentage of manual tests that is not worth investing in or is not appropriate to invest in. And the bottom chart, the x-axis, is the frequency of executions. So what we're seeing is that many organizations begin their journey from the majority of manual testing and are selecting the top curve, which basically is oriented towards more and more coverage. But as you create 20, 25% of your test cases, that still works, and you're still on somewhat infrequent testing cycle, and it's not necessarily scalable, so everything still seems to work. But as you get to 50% or more, what we're seeing is that tests become flaky. They don't work as well. And so now you get into this nasty loop where basically you're troubleshooting a lot of test cases. And basically you're troubleshooting concurrency, you're troubleshooting independence of the test cases, modularity, and things of that nature, test data, and things of that nature. So now you're into, if you're working on test creation, now you're maybe 20% of your time is about creating new test cases, and 80% of their time is about struggling. And so people almost never get to the actual target of high coverage and high velocity. The approach that we're preaching is very similar to software creation in the sense that fast, accelerated cycles that really validate what you're doing and then moving to the next level. So if you look at the bottom axis, basically we're advocating that every test case that you run, you need to execute that test case for 100 times, right? And if you were able to achieve 15% of your test cases, and then you start going towards the 20%, run each of those and every suite 100 times. And when that works together, scalably in a predictable and non-flaky manner, that's when you move on. So at every point in time, you prove the model, it's reliable, it's predictable, and when something fails, it indicates an authentic failure. And I'm going to come back to this when we're going to talk about the continuous testing benchmark. The secret of the entire system is that green is green, and when something fails, that means it's not the script, it's the actual software, and there's actual defect that you need to fix. And this way, you can show value to developers, from QA to developers. You can grow all the way to continuous testing. And naturally, all the time, you run the test to make sure that they are predictable, they are reliable, and you're creating actual insight from all of those test executions. So that's the mantra. Let's dive deep into the details. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So I see three phases in building a continuous testing practice. And these phases, it will not surprise you, very similar to a DevOps mantra. Also here, I see this as a combination of people, tooling, and process. And so as you begin this journey of building a scalable and predictable journey, you want to look at the staff that you have. And most of the staff that you have will be manual testers at that point. And so what you want to ask yourself is, are they interested in adopting coding skills, sophisticated coding languages? Some of them will say, I'm not interested in that. That's a level of complexity that I'm not interested in that. But the majority of those people, in my experience, will actually see that as an evolution of their career. So check their interest, check their level of coding skills, which out the door will probably be fairly low. And then based on that, select the tooling that you want to use. If you have some people in this team that have knowledge about Java or JavaScript, that's a benefit. C# as well, Python, and other tools. Some other options include BDD, which is basically an English-like description of a test case that describes basically the test flow. When you choose such frameworks that include BDD and so forth, you need somebody on the team, I'm going to refer back to this as a quarterback, but you need somebody in the team to facilitate how people are going to write their test scripts, how are they going to do this in scale, and whenever there's a BDD command that is new and not yet implemented in native code in Java or JavaScript, that person will help build that integration. Lastly, from a process perspective, you now have a set of scripts that you can execute. I believe we're talking here about a limited set of scripts, like I wrote below. The outcome would be 10 good, reliable, predictable scripts that can run on occasion. This wouldn't be a scalable, reliable process that you can run on a time. You can run it on occasion. Next slide, please. So now you're in the maturity phase and you're trying to establish trust with developers. In other words, the key word here is that the test results that you generate are authentic. When you see a failure, it is actually a failure, and otherwise your tests are green. And this is really critical. Developers, when they see flakiness as an outcome of your tests, they will disengage immediately. And so this is really the orientation of this column. So from a people perspective, what you'll start to see is SDETs, which are basically testers who are coders. They are familiar with code, they can write test cases, and sometimes those are starting to embed themselves inside the development team, the squad themselves. From a tooling, you're starting to look at frameworks. And frameworks here, I don't mean WebDriver or Selenium or Appium. What I mean is a cross-platform, scalable framework that allows you to run many, many tests in parallel. It deals with test data and things of that nature. And inside that framework, you're looking at platforms, you're looking at parallelization, you're looking at scale, you're looking at reporting and things of that nature. And you're also looking at the lab. You can decide that the lab will be on your premise, which is one level of effort, or you give it to a cloud vendor such as SauceLab to manage your lab in the cloud in such a way that you can focus on your software testing. From a process perspective, you're now starting to look at a large amount of data stemming out of these executions. And so you need a scalable data analysis tool, because nobody, even if you have an authentic set of executions and failures or successes, those failures, analyzing those failures one by one will be very, very time consuming. So you need a tool to give you big data approaches to group failures and analyze them as one, as opposed to intuitively pick some of those failures and analyze those. Also, you would want to wire this point to your build server, such that every commit or every couple of hours, every commit there would be a smoke test running, every couple of hours or nightly there would be a regression test, and so forth. What would be a good outcome, what to expect at this level? I would say 50% of your target coverage, very low flakiness between two executions, and a nightly regression test, maybe even a smoke test. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now we're in the continuous testing mature process. So in addition to QA and SDETs, now we have developers executing tests. What kind of tests are those developers executing? So those developers are executing native framework such as Cypress, XCUI, Espresso, and so forth, in addition to all of your executions that are happening as well. And what happens is that the wall between SDETs and QA and developers are crumbling apart. Basically, the build that a developer delivers to QA and SDETs is much better in terms of quality than it was before. You also see fast executions because now we are very motivated to give a developer a result for their commit within 2 minutes. I like to call it, before that developer can make coffee. So a headless execution is appropriate for this level because headless executions are faster. And for functional testing at the commit level, you don't necessarily need all the deep debugging and cross-browser and so forth. All that you're trying to do is functionally validate that your commit works as expected. You're also introducing at this level also non-functional testing, things like front-end performance testing, things like accessibility and so forth, not necessarily at the commit level, but possibly at the regression test and so forth, depending on the type of test. But these are now expanded coverage functions that ideally utilize the same test cases in order to achieve visibility about accessibility, about performance, and so forth. In terms of process, now you're wired into the build server. And so it's almost like testing is happening all the time. There are all the time executions. And what you need to start thinking about at this point is how do you allocate the right test to the right time when to test it. For example, I'll give you an example that I see across a large number of customers. What we're seeing is that the smoke test initially, the hypothesis is that the smoke test completes within 2 minutes or so, or maybe within 10 minutes, let's say. So you're starting with 20 executions, 30 executions, and what happens over time is that from the requirements of new sprints, new requirements come in. And so that's smoke, and nobody is responsible to take out redundant executions from the smoke test and move them later to the regression test. And what ends up happening is that the smoke tests become hundreds of tests, right? And that becomes inefficient again because it takes a lot of time. And so my recommendation is to look at the different tests that you're running and decide whether they're appropriate for smoke tests, for regression tests, and so forth. And so from the perspective of what to expect, you're now at a high coverage, you have unit and smoke tests, you have early developer feedback, your developers are rarely spending time fixing production problems that were released months and months ago. And also what you'll also see, I believe, is that there is less churn in developers, because what happens without quality practice, developers are spending a lot of time fixing defects that were introduced months and months ago. That is a very frustrating job. If they fix defects that were introduced 2 minutes ago, that is much, much easier. Next slide, please. So to summarize this area, for example, I'm taking digital banking, it mandates accelerated software development process, but also quality process. So while many people in this industry think that, if you accelerate the sprints and accelerate the releases and use tools like Jira and other tools, you're doing the right job. If you leave quality behind, eventually you won't be able to accelerate your velocity. So automating quality activities have to happen with cloud assets, because your ability to scale, to provide data retention, to be compliant with your corporate needs, and so forth. And then enabling developer efficiency and the ability to deliver better product are so important. And so our mantra is test better. We're not saying test more. Notice this. We're saying test smarter. Test the right test cases that are important for you. Test those faster and test better. Make sure that they are reliable and scalable and independent, and they are producing the right insight to drive your analysis and defect correction. Next slide, please. So we talked here a little bit about the practice of building continuous testing, and Sauce Lab has this diagram that you can see here, which talks about looking at maturity. How mature are you in building this practice? And you're probably familiar with the idea of maturity in any practice that you do. It's a set of stages and the type of activities that you do during those stages. And we've got culture, we've got strategy, and so forth. And all the way to the right, you're in continuous testing. Next slide, please. But effectively, what our customers are asking us is, what does good actually look like? So for good or bad, our customers are very pragmatic. Give me some metrics. It's not just a qualitative measurements of what type of activities I'm doing. I want some metrics that I can actually work on, that I can actually measure a team, or I can measure the organization and say, this is an area that I could improve on and I want to invest in. Next slide, please. And so I would argue, Bill, give it another click. I would argue that Sauce Labs is in a unique position. Yep, Sauce Lab is in a unique position to provide you this insight, because we have a large and diverse set of test cases from many, many customers in many verticals. And we have a large set of data, and we have the ability to analyze this data for your benefits. Next slide, please. And so we came up with the first industry continuous testing benchmark. That benchmark can be analyzed by a team in your organization, where you can go to one team and say, hey, you're probably a little bit more just introduced to continuous testing. Let me help you in these areas. Or to the entire organization to analyze where you can improve. Let's go in and take a look at each of those metrics. Next slide, please. So the first one, and I would argue probably the most important one, is test quality. So we give 50%, we give 0 score for a test that naturally is 50-50 on its flakiness. So basically, you might as well save time and flip a coin to determine if the functionality tested by this test case will pass or not. We advocate that 90% confidence in the test pass-fail rate is the target that you should strive for, and that score gets 100 score from us. And so you can see to the right the distribution of our customers versus average pass rate. So many customers are well up there between the 90 to 100%, but we also have a lot of customers across our customer base who have a lot of room for improvement. And so, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the predictability of your testing is critical to establish the value that you're trying to drive, whether with the executives or whether with the development team. Next slide, please. The next one is test runtime. So the metric itself basically says that if you're under 2 minutes, you'll get 100 score. And the longer it takes, your score will go down. The logic to it is intuitive. Basically, if you run a longer test, you cover more functionality, your test might be a little bit more flaky and so forth, so it's more likely to fail. In fact, a test that's over two minutes, you'll see this in the next slide, has 150% likelihood of failure compared to under 2 minutes. But to me, this speaks to a deeper, more meaningful value. We advocate that your test cases have to be modular. They have to be modular because you want to reuse them, because you want to parallelize them, and because you want to detach them when you decide to move a test or a portion of the test from the smoke test to the regression test. So the more granular your test case is, the more likelihood you will be successful in achieving the right stability that you need. Let's look at the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, if your test is between 2 to 7 minutes, it's got 150% likelihood to fail compared to a test under 2 minutes. And that makes sense, that's intuitive, but my appeal is, try to make your test cases as modular as possible. You can always tailor them one to another and reutilize the driver, but be cognizant that test cases have to be scalable and reliable. Next slide, please. The next topic is test platform coverage, and here we advocate that 5 platforms in the modern world is probably sufficient. And after 5 platforms, you get 100% score. We see a lot of customers keeping a lot of platforms in place, and that's okay. That's spending your analytics and so forth. But a minimum of 5 platforms is what we advocate. And as you can see, this is exactly the stage for most of our customers. Next slide, please. And lastly, test concurrency. So test concurrency clearly is very, very important because what you want to do is between a number of teams that run nightly regression, if you've got team across the globe, you want to allocate the maximum capacity of VMs or devices for those teams and basically avoid the situation we have randomly clashing scripts, test executions that fail because of timeouts. And so you want to be smart about the allocation of the parallelism in order to maximize the test execution and the predictability, but also minimize the test execution such that you can get the results in time, and then the next team can fire off their regression test and so forth. So 75% average utilization of the concurrency gets 100 score, and then after that, it just gets better. Next slide, please. Perfect. So to summarize, 2 slides to summarize here. So the benchmark score in total will be an average of the 4 scores. And again, it can be done at the team level, it can be done at the organization level. And this really helps you understand where you are against other people who are getting this score as well and are running continuous testing. Next slide, please. So the way we usually like to deliver this score is put it in context. So, for those people who are working with us, we deliver all 5 metrics and we put them in the context of the average score of the rest of our customer base. This report can be available, to our customers. We deliver it and they utilize it to improve their processes on an ongoing basis. There's also a white paper on our website that basically describes the methodology behind it and provides a couple of examples. So with that, hopefully this was interesting, and let's open it up for questions.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Naveen. That was very helpful. We do have a few minutes left for questions. So let me open it up with you, Amir, by asking, doesn't granularity in test cases cause maintenance time to increase?
I don't believe so. This is my opinion. So basically, if you think about it, think about test cases like I said earlier, like software development. And so software developers like to keep functions, very lean, very small, very readable, and very maintainable. And so, when something breaks, you can look at the stack trace or you can look at the code and very quickly get to the function that you need. And so in my view, the code is much, what I mean is the test code, similar to actual application code, is much more readable. And at the end of the day, it's much easier to debug it and to fix it. So in my view, it's much better way to do it this way.
Okay, thanks. Naveen, I have one for you. Instead of N+1 approach, why can't we do in sprint N?
Well, this is Sri Shankar, one of the panelists. Let me take this one. So the reason we want to go with an N+1 approach is that we want to create automation pack for features that are tested already and are stable. Unless you do this, if we start creating automation pack for features that are still being tested or not yet tested, we run the risk of having maintenance overhead later because the feature changes or the feature has defects. You are creating an automation pack that's going to have these defects in them as well. So that's one of the reasons, and as a best practice, we recommend staggering your automation to 1 sprint further and automate the features that are already tested in the previous sprint.
Okay, thanks for that. Amir, I know that we've been covering a lot of principles around lean automation, but we've had several folks write in and ask, what is lean automation? Is there summary, a high-level statement that perhaps you could provide, and I can also ask Naveen and Srini to weigh in.
Yeah, in my view, lean automation means that you have a very focused scope on the agenda, on the target of the test. And like I mentioned earlier, instead of making large strides in terms of coverage, focus first on the test itself and how well it runs in scalable automation. So increasing the frequency of execution to a degree that it's reliable and predictable is more important, in my view, than achieving high coverage. So that's what I mean with lean automation.
Great, thank you. Naveen, Srini, do you have anything to add to that?
I think what Amir said is 100% correct. So the main objective should be to create something first and make sure that it works better and works faster, and then build on top of it. So it's an iterative process.
Okay, thank you. So for the Aspire team, we did have this question pre-submitted and all submitted in the presentation, but it's how do you control the state of the data? As you move through time, the data used by other testers will change. A test needs constant data condition.
Well, from a testing standpoint, it is always a best practice to have complete data. Avoid any kind of data dependency, because you may run a couple of tests, grouped together at one time, and you all you have to do is just create the set of test data that you need right before the test as part of your setup process. We could use API calls if that is an option to create data just before the test is triggered. And at the end of the test, you could probably use a restoring function to set the data back to its original state. So by that way, every test would have its own set of data that is not being used by any other tester. So it's really important for test automation packs to have complete data isolation. That's what I would recommend. But in case where you're required to use data that is already available in the system, we may incur a bit of maintenance effort and have all these challenges come up. So I would recommend having isolated data for all your tests.
Okay, thank you. So we've got time for two more questions. Amir, Michael asks, do you recommend the QA test be checked in as part of the build in the same repository or run separately from the build?
My recommendation and what I usually see is that the test code is in a separate repository, and it's checked in its own page. So your software development for the test code has its own cadence and its own process. Teams, advanced teams that are developing test code while with the development team at the same cadence, they do their own commits, right, all the time. Sometimes even developers do their own commits. And so it might happen, actually, could somebody mute? I'm getting interference. It might happen that, you check in test code and application code at kind of the same time, but that's very rare, and those are independent of one another. So I would say separate repo, and the commit can happen at any time, uncoordinated with the application code.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap this up with an answer to one question, and that was whether or not the AFTA 3.0 was open source. It's built with open source tools, but is available to those who engage with Aspire. So if you have any more information, or if you want more information about that, there'll be a brief poll at the end of this webinar, and you'll be able to indicate that you'd like to learn a little bit more. So with that, I'd really like to thank Naveen and Amir for their time today, for all of you for taking an hour out of your day to learn a little bit more about continuous testing and hypertesting. And so I wish you all a good Tuesday, and we'll see you on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.